Adventures in Gaming.
With Big Man Anthony.
And Little Man George. When I hear Neo Geo,
Yeah.
I don't think of anybody. No, I think of you because you were the only person I've ever known that owned a Neo Geo.
Yeah.
So, what is it about Neo Geo? Let me ask you something. Is it your favorite console of all time?
It kind of is because I felt very special owning one, being one of the few people that got it like almost on launch and being able to have it. And while every other kid was like playing with Nintendo, which is great system, and Sega and all them, but at the same time, it was in a whole different league. I mean, we could say that as far as its graphic capabilities and as far as like being arcade, one-to-one, right? Because it was an arcade. It was literally a arcade ripped off and just put it into a console box, and make it easy for somebody to like put it in a cartridge and put it in. Because I saw the cartridges for the arcade. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much the same exact cartridge, it's pretty almost one-to-one, but I heard it doesn't like really case in.
They're not as fancy looking, the arcade cartridges.
Not as fancy looking, yeah. So they, on top of that, they made that beautiful art graphics, the big, nice covers. I mean, it was a high quality device. It was giving you a luxury feeling of gaming, which is kind of weird because, I mean, do we really have that? I mean, the PlayStation Pro, right? Like, I mean, does that feel
no,
like
that doesn't exist anymore. The luxury game console, it doesn't exist anymore.
No.
So the Neo Geo came out in 1990, which is funny because it actually came out before the Super Nintendo in America.
Yeah.
And it was way more powerful than a Super Nintendo. And it came out before a Super Nintendo, which is interesting. So how did you even hear about Neo Geo? Because I have experience with Neo Geo in the arcade, but you were the only person, like I said, that I knew that had a Neo Geo console when it was originally out. I'm not talking about as an adult with your own money. You had a Neo Geo. So how did you even hear about it? Where did you even get it? Like, it wasn't, that well known.
All right, so me and you were really into the magazines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were really into the magazines, and it was kind of weird. I was one of those weirdos that liked Japanese video games. Mm-hmm. I always wanted the Japanese version of something, and I just, me as a person, I always want that oddball kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's just a weird thing.
So the same guy that had an Atari Lynx and a TurboGrafx 16 also had a Neo Geo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now I have like a weird car, like the Polestar, which people are like, "What is that?" So it's always been, I guess, in my blood to have something a little original and different and out there. I always wanted to be like, it's kind of like if you have the iPhone and then I come with the iPhone Pro. And then somebody else comes with the iPhone Pro Max, like trying to find that next level. So I always wanted to find that next level. And that next level for me was looking directly at Japanese video games. So back then they were the ones pushing the innovations and everything. So I was looking into their systems, Famicom, all those, like everything that was out there. And then I stumbled upon in big, like when they started announcing the Neo Geo, and it's a true arcade. And I mean, wasn't that like, I mean, at that point, we weren't looking for realistic graphics. We just wanted what was in the arcade.
That's what I wanted.
Experience. Yeah. That's all we wanted. We didn't want anything else. We wanted the arcade one-to-one experience. And that was really difficult because arcades were so expensive, right?
Of course.
So when you compare like a $2,000, $5,000 arcade to like a Neo Geo, which I think was starting, what was it?
What was it starting price? Was it like or something, wasn't it? The home console?
I think it was. Well, I bought it around. I think it was like $650.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
And then what did the games cost?
I got a $50 discount because it was an open box. Somebody who returned one, right? So
where'd you get it?
That's what
though?
my Neo Geo was.
At a store? You just got it at like an electronics store?
No, I went to one of those mom and pop.
Yeah, they used to have stuff
stores.
Like that. Yeah.
And you know what? It was so exciting because those mom and pop stores had that feeling that that feeling you don't get anymore. Like when you go to GameStop, they're just like, "Hey, yeah, well, what do you want?" Like, these mom and pop people, they knew what was going on. They knew what you wanted, And so I walked in there, and I remember I was with my dad, and luckily, I had a dad who had fun, means at the time. He always bought me like expensive things, but this was kind of pushing it. I mean, it was kind of pushing it when you think about it. It was like, what was a Nintendo costing around that time?
Oh, it was like 200.
Yeah, so $200, and
Yeah.
I'm making my dad go get a console, and I'm telling him it's a deal. Dad, it's a deal. He didn't know the price, but he just knew I was getting him a deal. And when he went there, he's like $50 off on a $650 console. He was like, he looked at me, and you know what happened? It was so funny. He turned around and just said, let's just go. Let's go.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, let's go. So we're walking out, and my whole dreams are being crushed. And guess what? At the right next to the door, there was a Neo Geo arcade console, and I was like, Dad, can I just play one before I leave? He's like, is that what you were buying?
Right.
He's like, because it says Neo Geo on it. And he's like, yeah, this is what I'm buying. And he saw Baseball Stars. I mean, those graphics were amazing. 2020, right? No, actually, no. It was a Baseball Stars. Yeah,
Two.
Baseball Stars.
Yeah, Baseball Stars and Baseball Stars 2.
Yeah.
And then
so
like Super Baseball.
It was Baseball Stars 2, the one on the arcade. And he saw that, and then he saw the Art of Fighting, and he's like, whoa, I remember Nintendo, like these little characters, Art of Fighting, they're like full screen zooming effects and everything.
That's cool that your dad like knew about video games too.
Yeah. Well, he didn't know, but he used to like when I bought the Nintendo, he was one of the first people to bring it into the house, bring his brothers in and say, look what I bought, look what I bought. And they would try to play it, and they locked themselves up in the room, and I jimmied the door, and when I came in, I saw them just going back and forth, and they're like, he looks like a plumber, doesn't he? They're just doing the dumbest thing because they don't know how to play video games.
Right.
He remembers what it looked like, and so when he saw the Neo Geo, he's like, this is out there. He's like, you know what? It's worth it. Let's go back. And I was like, what? Are you serious? And he's like, yeah, let's get it, right?
Wow.
And so we went back, we picked it up, and then he's like, and the guy's like, well, it came with a game. He's like, but you should take another one. I mean, you can't just be with one game, right? And then my dad asked him, and how much is another game, right? And they were $250. Yeah. It's like, bro, what was a cartridge cost back then?
Oh, anywhere from like 30 to 50, you know?
Yeah.
See, that for me was the problem with Neo Geo. Yeah. Like, if you could somehow save up or somehow convince your parents to get you a $650 console, that's just the beginning, because the games are not affordable. See, like, that to me was the biggest hurdle, of anyone getting a Neo Geo. I mean, even to this day, how could you really afford a $200 game or $250 game? That to me was the biggest
problem. Even today's standard, $250 for a game?
One game that you might not like or something too. It's a big gamble.
GTA 6 is probably going to be that game.
Yeah, I mean, it won't even be that much. See, so the Neo Geo was also an arcade cabinet. And I was a big arcade guy, and I was playing Neo Geo games in the arcade. I'm not even sure if I was aware there was a home system until you told me about it. That's what I mean. Like, I didn't even really, I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't see it in stores. I didn't know anyone that had it. So I remember, now to me, it seemed like Neo Geo in the arcades was kind of popular. It wasn't like some obscure, arcade cabinet. It was at all the arcades. It was at a comic book store I used to go to. I used to go to this comic book shop.
It was the reason why it was popular is because Neo Geo came with the idea is like, look, these arcade makers are selling you a $2,000 arcade, right? While with a Neo Geo, we have removable cartridges.
Yeah.
So you can always swap out, and we will give you, when you buy the cartridge, we give you the art that goes on the outside and everything. So arcade people were like, oh, wow, this is like the next generation of arcade. I'm saving a ton of money, and I'll always be updated.
Right. So they're just getting one cabinet, and they could buy up to 4 games, right? It was 4 games?
It was, I think, it was 4 games that they could install and play at the same time.
Right.
But they could always switch them out. Like if the game didn't sell, they could always be like, hey, and some people, from what I heard, would trade them in for like another game and then pay the difference for the new, let's say the new hot thing.
Right. That was really cool. Yeah. That was, right, because you could go to an arcade or a place that had a Neo Geo arcade game, and you could choose one of 4 games to play. I used to play Magician's Lord. I used to play
Yeah.
Cyberlip,
Yeah.
and then the whole selling point of the Neo Geo home system was the games are identical to the arcade.
Yeah.
There's no
Well,
difference.
they are the arcade. They're
They
the
are the
same.
arcade. Except there
Yeah.
was like the MVS and the AVS. The home was the AVS and the arcade was the MVS.
MVS was home.
Yeah.
AVS was
See,
the
I get
arcade.
confused because I thought AVS was the arcade because the A stood for arcade, but I'm not even 100% sure. But I guess the small differences were the home games don't say you need to add a quarter or stuff like that. They just made
Yeah, but that was only a thing that
like
when
very
you
small
installed the
differences.
cartridge, it had like a notch or something. I understood that when they put it in, it knew to just go into the home system
Mode.
version.
Yeah.
But you could always unlock the arcade version too if you wanted to.
Okay. Okay.
And it was easy to unlock it. And then you could give yourself credits and like
Yeah.
cling, 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 cling,
You're all of a
like kind of
sudden
like,
like the
and then you
arcade
could just
owner.
play unlimited and even if you died. So that was kind of cool about that system. The fact that you could get, and it could actually say, insert coin would drive my friends and everyone crazy. Like, wow, this is it. This is the arcade. It literally has the same menu. Like,
And look at the controllers it came with.
Yeah.
Unlike any, game system, you didn't get a little controller or a control pad. You got two gigantic arcade style sticks.
They did it right. I mean, let's face it, they did it right. It was a beautiful, high quality.
They were gigantic.
Yeah.
Right?
Heavy. What?
They were so big, the arcade sticks that you got, and you got two with the console, right?
Yeah.
You got both of them with the console. It was crazy. Just that alone, I mean, was so impressive. And you actually, I don't know if you remember this, you used to leave it at my house once in a while. Right? Like you would leave it. I don't know if you were traveling or what you were doing, but I would keep it for like a week or two sometimes at a time. You trusted me with it. I hope I didn't break it. I don't think I did. But no, and that was so cool because I would, have to like take out my Nintendo or Super Nintendo or whatever I was playing at the time, Sega Genesis, and I would hook up the Neo Geo. And it was such a big jump in terms of graphics. There was nothing like it at home. And then throughout time, one of the interesting things was, and we were talking about this, how some Neo Geo games eventually came out for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And you could see the difference.
They were trying to get as far and as close. And I remember the Genesis had like a little bit better visuals, but the Nintendo had the better audio. And like,
but you remember Samurai Showdown? So Samurai Showdown was one of my favorite Neo Geo games. And on the Neo Geo, it scales. It zooms in and out.
Yeah.
So they couldn't do that stuff, I guess, on the Super Nintendo or the Genesis.
No.
But on Genesis, the camera was always zoomed in, so the characters looked bigger. And on Super Nintendo,
is that what made it look like?
Yeah, on Super Nintendo, the camera was zoomed out, so the characters looked smaller. So,
okay, I didn't know that was a difference, but I just knew that it looked a little bit better on the Genesis when you put them side by side, but that the sound was better on the Nintendo. That I remember.
The sound was always better on Super Nintendo.
Yeah. Well, but you know what's funny is that the arcade wasn't even the best version of it because when the CD came out, right?
So there was a Neo Geo CD console that came out eventually, which you also got.
Yeah, which I also got because I love that system. But when the Neo Geo CD console came out,
the games came down in price though. When that came out, they weren't $250 anymore. They were like $50.
They came down in price. They remastered all the sounds of the games because they knew that those sounds were really not the original. Mm-hmm. It's just that they were limited by the polyphony of the console. But when the CD version came out, it was literally the band playing it, and you got the MP3 of it. It literally had an MP3. So I remember I used to like some of the music, so I used to just burn it onto an MP3 disc and then play it in my car, and I'd be listening to like video game music like I was a weirdo. Yeah.
And then the Neo Geo CD system had the traditional, more like Genesis, Super Nintendo style controllers. It didn't come with the arcade sticks anymore.
No.
So what did you prefer? Did you prefer the arcade sticks or the control pad?
Honestly, the arcade sticks are better for fighting, right? Mm-hmm. But those controllers were so good. I mean, I don't know how they designed them because they were. I mean, if I were to like If you were to say, hey, have the controller instead of the arcade stick, I'd be like, it's fine. But the arcade sticks that, I mean, like the regular controllers today, like the PlayStation or the, even the Nintendo, all of them, I don't care. They just don't have that, because it was almost like a stick.
The
It was
click.
like it was a different style controller, and it works. And I don't understand why nobody ever remade those, because that was a pretty interesting way of making it. I mean, very similar to what a joystick is today,
Mm-hmm.
but a little different, and I feel like a little bit better, honestly, because the joystick kind of is like the stick coming up and it just hits on the sides, while this was kind of more like a circular. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but
Oh, I remember using
it was
them. Yeah, they
yeah,
had that clicky.
and the
It was
clickiness about it was also nice
that's what
because
I
like
remember the most.
it gave it that like arcade kind of like feel. I think that's
In
what
a
they were going
controller.
for.
In other words, instead of like a thumb pad or an analog stick,
Yeah,
it had this like flat, basically control mechanism that felt more like, I know what you're saying, felt more like a joystick than it did a thumb pad, even though it
yeah,
looked like a thumb pad.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's kind of what it
yeah,
was.
and so honestly, they were really good. But if you were to tell me like I would how I would choose my controllers, I would use a joystick for like let's say any type of game that wasn't fighting, and when I went to fighting, I'd rather the regular arcade controllers, which I actually bought. There was a company that would sell you. This is how crazy Neo Geo was. They
This is how
sold
crazy
you
you were.
a cabinet of the Neo Geo, right? And they'd cut it out and make it into a controller.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they cut out the cabinet, and you still have the same cabinet like design inside of it. And I bought that. And I recently had to throw it out because I had it in storage, and it kind of got all moldy.
Oh.
And unfortunately, I had to throw it out. But oh my god, that was the best controller ever because it was heavy, it wouldn't move. And as much as I like the Neo Geo controllers, because they're light, you have to have them like on a desk or something so it doesn't move.
Yeah.
And those controllers, I could have them on my lap. I could have them anywhere, except they were big. So it's where do you put them?
So as far as the games, when Neo Geo first came out, there was a big variety of games. There were platformers, there were shooters, there were all types of games. But at some point, I mean, they basically went all in on fighting games. I guess with the popularity of Street Fighter 2, right? And then they went into the King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting. So do you think that was a good idea, or do you prefer the variety? Or
I understand what happened. What happened was it's kind of like if Mario was a hit and then every other game after that is a platformer, because you feel like you got something, and that's happening today, like with first person shooters. They got Call of Duty, and then there's like every other style of Call of Duty type games. Like they have a hit, and they just think that they can reproduce it, doing it over and over and over again, and then doing new versions of them. So I do get that reason why they did it. I got upset about it. There was other games that were released, I think in Japan, that were like, there was like a Tetris game. There were like all these other like Windjammers, all these other little games that were not fighting, but they were not popular. They were hard to get because stores wouldn't carry them because they would think that they wouldn't sell. And the real sellers and the things that they were constantly pushing were fighting games.
Yeah.
And I got to play some really weird ones, like 80K one was World Heroes. Do you know about World Heroes?
That was a fighting game, though.
Yeah, it was a fighting game. Yeah. It was such an interesting game. Like that's what I liked about the different fighting games, especially like when you go with the King of Fighters, you know what you're going to. It's kind of like when you go to Street Fighter, you know what you're going into. But then you got World Heroes, and even though they're similar, just like the King of Fighters is not exactly Street Fighter, and Samurai Showdown is not exactly like every other one. Having those differences is. It's interesting. You get to play it, and World Heroes had these weird. There's a guy with a mask, and he'd like pull it out, and like it was kind of crazy. So I definitely enjoyed World Heroes, but my favorite, which is not even the most graphical game, was Galaxy Fight.
Oh yeah, you like Galaxy Fight. See,
That was a Sunsoft game.
I liked their fighting games. I always thought Samurai Showdown, like you said, was an original take on fighting games with the sword fighters.
Yeah,
It was different than Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. It was different. But I do think they made very high quality platformers, adventure style games.
they did.
Like Blues Journey and Top Hunter. They made
Yes,
some good games that I think
Ink Man.
I would have liked to have seen where they would have gone with those other
Agreed, a
kinds of
hundred
games.
percent. I
You
agree
know,
with you 100%. Like I was so upset about the whole time. Like as much as I like these fighting games, as much as they were great games, they just stuck to one style. And then where are the other ones? And when I saw all these great games that came out,
they were good. Yeah.
I wanted the sequels. I wanted to see where they would go with it. It's the same thing feeling I got when 3D kicked in. Like 3D kicked in, and then what would have happened if 3D didn't kick in and we had today's graphical capabilities? Where would 2D go? But instead, all the 2D games that come out today are emulating the graphics of the
Yeah,
past.
the 2D games now are either pixel art or they're using polygons in a 2D environment, right? So
But
they're not.
they're not where, like I
No,
feel
they're
like
not
it's
where
not
they should be. They're
where
doing
2D would
like
go on naturally on its own progression.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Because even the pixel art is sort of like a perfected 16-bit. I would say that's kind of
Yeah.
the level that they hit. It's like 16-bit
Yeah.
without the
Yeah.
glitches.
They make the small characters. There's no detail to them. Like you could do a lot with the old graphics and make it updated. You could do a lot. I mean, Street Fighter. I mean, Neo Geo was an example of that. They get the they'd splash. You could throw people into cars. There was zooming effects. There was those.
The characters were always big
in the back. The parallel worlds
Yeah.
in the back. So that would give you perspective to like that. That is you were actually there. There was so many things going on.
It's funny that you say that too, because I don't want to change the subject, but
Yeah.
one game that I think is slightly underappreciated
Yeah.
is Street Fighter 3, which I
Yeah.
know Street Fighter is a very popular, game.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, oh, like, have you guys ever heard of Street Fighter? But I feel like Street Fighter 3 was almost like looked over because once you got to 4, 5, and 6, it was a different graphical style. But
Yeah.
Street Fighter 3 had very good pixel art because it came
Yeah.
out late in the 90s
Yeah.
and it was still using pixels. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like what you're talking about. It was almost like a glimpse of like, modern
Yeah.
pixel art, 2D style graphics that we never really got to see get past that point because everyone went to polygons. Or in the indie, generation of video games, like you said, they're kind of emulating 8-bit, 16-bit. They're not going,
Yeah.
further with it, really. That's a term I came up with too. It's like a perfected 16-bit,
Yeah.
with indie games where, it's basically they're stopping at sort of 16-bit. Although the Sega Saturn kind of had some good 2D games with big character sprites and stuff like that.
Obviously, pixel art are just little dots and what you can draw with. And then if you can what I was hoping is that they would take it now into 2K, maybe into 4K. Because if you play right now what we played in your TVs, it's not what it looked like. It's not how we saw it. Because when you played it in a smaller TV, in a CRT,
yeah.
which also is a different technology TV, it looked just like watching a video game today. But so when you look at our past games, they don't look like we saw them. So that's why I always wished for it to advance so that hopefully, when we could get those same video game quality in our new styles of TVs in 4K, that'd be great.
Right.
But getting back into the problems of Neo Geo, one started falling down because they were recreating too much of the fighting games, and the games were great, but even though just one category wasn't enough, it's almost like saying I'm giving you one game and this is all you can play in this console. And the second reason for its fall was because obviously it was expensive and they knew it, but they made a quality product, which you would see even rappers and everyone show off that they had the Neo Geo. It was like the biggest bling to show off if you had a Neo Geo, right? You made it if you had a Neo Geo. That was the expression, right? And then
it was in a movie or something too, wasn't it? Wasn't there a Neo Geo
yeah,
in
the
a movie?
movie.
I
Yeah.
forgot. That's right.
I think they were they robbed and they made a lot of money, and the whole point was they made it so they bought a Neo Geo. So that's what I'm saying. If you had a Neo Geo, it means you made it. You were doing good. So it was a status symbol. It was a great thing, but you couldn't sell a lot of them. So what they did is they say, how can we produce it? And they came out with the Neo Geo, right? The Neo Geo CD, and the Neo Geo CD. Only problem I saw was two major problems. Is one, it could have been a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. If they would have hit it a little bit earlier, like when Sony came out with their CD system, right? That would have been like a game changer for them. And the second thing that they did wrong was putting in a 1x system when
I remember that.
At the time I think we were already like at 16x. And so I mean they could have gone with an 8x or something. A 1x was ridiculous loading times, and the size of those games, they were big games.
They were big games.
And so yeah, they were big games, and so it wasn't a game that you can just wait. They would load it all into the ROM. So
Pro Gear spec.
Yeah. So the way the Neo Geo CD did it is that they would grab the game, preload almost the whole game into the RAM, and then just play it right out of the RAM. It's not like they would put it into a hard drive, which is obviously a hard drive was not a thing back then with video games. So they would just have the RAM. And some games that were so graphical, they'd only load a level of the RAM, and then when they had to load the second level, you'd be like, I'm gonna go get coffee and come right back.
So there's another sort of era to Neo Geo that wasn't popular, and that was the Hyper Neo Geo 64, which never came out as a home console.
Yeah, no.
But they had a few arcade games, right? They had a Samurai Showdown.
Did you ever play the Hyper Neo Geo 64?
No, I've never even seen one in person. I saw some videos and pictures. It kind of, they went into the Polygon era. They went into...
Yeah, I did see one in person, but all I remember is I was in a rush. I couldn't really stay, but I did see it, and it was very bad.
Was it Samurai Showdown?
It was Samurai Showdown, and the polygons were horrible.
It was like Virtua Fighter 1 or 2-ish?
It was a little bit worse than Virtua Fighter 1.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that bad. The backgrounds, there's nothing in the backgrounds, like these rendered polygons, and they were trying to imagine Virtua Fighter 1 and then trying to make as much as you can a Neo Geo character that looked like, let's say, Mai or one of the famous characters into these ugly polygons, and then in a ring where there's nothing around, it's just blank. It was not like what I expected. I think that they were trying to do 3D a little too ahead of their time. Like they've always were ahead of their time, but 3D ahead of time was always a bad thing because 3D, the first generation of 3D was really bad,
Except for Super Mario 64. I mean, Mario 64? Come on. That was good.
That's different though. Mario 64.
It's another conversation, but
yeah, it's another conversation.
It still kind of holds up, I think. But
it does.
So the good news is Neo Geo never went away. SNK is still making games. New King of Fighters, Metal Slug Tactics. There's a new Fatal Fury coming out.
Yeah.
So all
I
good
already
things.
by Fatal Fury. I got it on
City
the
of Wolves, I think.
No, I should have got it on the Xbox because I like to promote fighters on the Xbox because Xbox is missing a lot of fighting games.
But they've also released some kind of, hardware here and there. They had the Neo Geo X.
Yeah.
That I actually have.
It wasn't originally made SNK. But it was licensed.
Right. It was licensed, and it was a handheld.
Yeah.
That you could also dock and play on the TV, kind of like a Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
And they had that controller with games built in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Which is a strange, I don't know. To me, and that controller was not even like the original Neo Geo controller. It was like a whole different controller. Right?
Yeah.
It was like a big, wide controller. And then they released those little arcades, the little arcade games. Right?
Which ones?
The little mini arcade games, the Neo Geo arcade games.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I have one of those. I have one of the little arcade cabinets. They're cool. The only downside to that cabinet is they didn't put batteries in them
Mm,
when they have a lot of space for batteries.
yeah.
Maybe they wanted to keep the cost down, but at the same time, the batteries would have given it the weight it needs. It also would have been able to be portable because that's kind of the whole point of it being that small.
Yeah, I've seen them in person. I haven't actually played one, but I saw it at a store.
But here's why I think Neo Geo lasted. Why that brand? Because it shouldn't have lasted. Let's be honest. Everyone thought that was going to be the first brand to fall, and
That's what I
they're
mean. It's still around.
right. Yeah, yeah. Everyone told me like, wow, at that price, they're never going to make it. So let's face it. How did they make it? And I'm just going to say, like you said, that first generation product was so high quality, so good. Those games were so much above and beyond what it was. It was giving you not what people were saying close to the experience. They weren't saying arcade experience. I remember Nintendo and both Sega were saying arcade quality,
Hmm.
but they were not. And so they were actually delivering what they were saying. And so I think that stayed in the hearts of people. And the fact that it was such a status symbol to have, that's also in the hearts of people who got it and kind of shared all that love around. So Neo Geo, it was a very special place, even for us, because I mean, we haven't even told our deep story about how we got into the Neo Geo, like, inside world.
We called Chad Okada on a
It's
three-party
there's a
line.
hotline where you can call up, and that was a thing we used to do. Which one day I think we have to do a whole
We're
episode
gonna
on
do a
that.
whole episode on that. Yeah,
But
but
let's just cut it to this Neo Geo one, and
so who is
we,
Chad Okada?
the famous Game Lord, which he named himself like the Game Lord,
Right.
right? And the idea of the Game Lord was that he was the expert and know it all on Neo Geo. And let's face it, they chose the right guy, man. This guy knew his stuff. This guy
And
knew
he
his
knew
stuff. He
us
was not.
because we called him so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He knew us. He knew everything.
He
So
was a
we'd call
cool
him
guy.
constantly, and we would nitpick and we would ask him things about every chip that's on that system. We knew everything that was going on. We knew why he was explaining to us why there was a chip to be able to do the zooming,
Hmm.
why there was a chip why they separated the audio. They had an audio chip that was designated only for audio so that they wouldn't take away from the processor and would also be more efficient. He explained to us all these things that we kind of like made us kind of a fan too. So that channel, I'm sure that there was a lot of people calling because a lot of people know him, the Game Lord. So there was people calling, even just kids who wanted a Neo Geo and would just be calling just because they were interested in this stuff. So that's another reason why, I mean, there's a heart, like a little heart for people, for fans who still are into that Neo Geo console. And there's so many fans that the Game Lord is hiring these days.
And he
Let's
used to
face
actually
it.
talk about video games in general with us, not just Neo
Yeah.
Geo stuff.
Yeah.
Remember, he used to talk about gaming, like, he used to talk about Sega, he used to talk about fighting games, he used to talk
Yeah.
about everything. He used to talk about Nintendo 64. I remember we
Yeah.
were talking to him about that before it came out. And I remember he wasn't a big fan of polygons at the time. He didn't
Yeah.
like 3D fighting games. He was,
Yeah.
into what Neo Geo was doing, and that was interesting. But there is something, like, there's new Neo Geo news right now, and that's
Yeah.
that they're partnering with Evercade, which is your new favorite system. So your two
Yeah.
favorite systems of all time, Evercade and
No,
Neo
Evercade is
Geo.
not my favorite system, but I do like Evercade a lot.
So what
It's
do you think they're doing though? They're going to
nostalgia
make
from the 90s, the way everything is physical. And the new console that I heard that came out, the new version of the console I have, is like a little bit better quality. It looks nice. It does have a small similarities to the Nintendo Switch 2, but it doesn't have the same controller style. But it's still a very, very capable, good system, and it's going to have a lot of arcade games that we've always loved to play inside a little portable these days. And a small screen, it looks exactly the way we saw it.
But now they're partnering with SNK. They're going to do some sort of Neo Geo collection. They just announced it a few days ago. So
Yeah.
what do you think that's going to be? A collection of fighting games? What? I didn't hear much
Some
about it.
people were even thinking they might even do like hardware, where they were going to do
Like a themed,
there
like a
was
themed
rumors
console.
of like maybe a Neo Geo arcade version of the hardware. And there was also going to be, yeah, I think mainly it's going to be a few cartridges that are going to have packs of all the Neo Geo games.
Collection.
Unfortunately, not all Geo games were originally first party.
Yeah.
So I know that some games are not like totally there. Just like in TurboGrafx, like Splatterhouse, they have it, but it's through a third party, which was the one who made it, which I didn't even know that.
And also, Neo Geo Pocket was a pretty good handheld system. I did have that, and I had some.
Yeah, you actually had a Neo Geo.
I had a Neo Geo
You
Pocket.
were an Neo Geo owner. There you go.
And I have the Neo Geo Pocket collections for the Switch.
Yeah,
which are really good collections of games.
I never even.
No, they're good.
At that time, I was living in Long Island, so I didn't get to see you a lot.
Yeah, no, those are good games. But this was our Neo Geo Spectacular.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Neo Geo again because it's George's favorite system of all time. But all right, man. You good?
I'm good.
I'm good, bro. All right.